It does seem like the series turned when they did go small, though, right? When they did
Yeah.
play the small ball lineup. And it's funny because the Utah's anecdote to the small ball lineup, or at least what they thought was to put Derek Favors in, and you just put in another big. Like, what do you think that the Jazz can do to combat when the Clippers go small?
Yeah, I mean the Favors minutes are such a big L for Utah right now. Like Gobert had to come back in like really early in the third quarter. Like he barely got any break, and I think that like probably impacted how things went in the fourth, just because like every time Favors is in the game, PG and Kawhi are just going to eat. Like,
yeah,
there's just like that's just something they figured out in the matchup, and I think at this point, like they just have a confidence about it too, where they're just like, yeah, we're just gonna go at this guy and see what happens. As far as responses they could have, I don't know. Like that's kind of the issue with Utah. Like that's what makes guarding a guy like Kawhi or a guy like PG so hard for them, is like they don't really have that like rough, 6'10", 6'9" tweener type that can like help them play small and like take like some of the bigger matchups and stuff, right? Like Royce O'Neal is not going to get that done for you. I mean, he had a pretty good second half defensively, but he can't be like the small ball guy for them. And I don't really they don't have that guy.
Well, how do you evaluate Gobert as a defender, right? Because when he's obviously one of the best defenders in the league, but we see this time and time again that when you go into the postseason, his kryptonite is when you play small against him. By and large, you saw that with the Warriors when Utah was playing them a few years back, and then you see that now. How do you evaluate him as a defender? He's a great rim protector, but I'm not sure that he always gets twisted around in pick and rolls when it comes to the postseason, and he has to get attacked. So how do you evaluate him?
I thought he was fine today. Like I thought he had a really good start to the third quarter. He was really dominant. And I think he's improved as a pick and roll guy. And certainly in this series, it just doesn't seem to be that big of a problem when he gets stuck on switches. Like it's definitely not the most fun, but it's not something that's terrorizing him by any means. I think it's tough for him sometimes when he has to guard Batum and then come back to try to protect the rim. But for the most part, he's actually done a pretty reasonable job, honestly. Like, to me, it's the moments that he's not on the floor. But it's an interesting discussion, though. Like, I think for the longest time, defense was evaluated by, like, who protects the rim the best. And it's still a really important part of the game. But, like, the game is changing so much that you do have to kind of be able to do everything. But yeah, like it's just not really like a question you used to hear. Like, can this guy defend everybody? That wasn't like the criteria, even in the days of like Dwight Howard. Like this is all kind of new. But it's an interesting discussion. I didn't vote him defensive player of the year, so like I'm kind of on that page. But at the same time, like man, like rim protection is still like the most important thing in basketball.
Yeah, but it's funny because like, to your point about that, even like 5, 6, 7 years ago, Amir Ashik was getting bags just because he could defend the rim, and like all these players were getting
the Turkish hammer.
You see the vibes. But now you have to defend the rim and guard all 5 positions now, and it's really a tough ask to even do. And it's just weird how we've evolved with that. I don't even know what the perfect defender is right now. Is it Draymond? Is it, I don't know. Like, what is that right now?
Is it Kawhi Leonard?
That's interesting, right? Because Kawhi, I was going to ask about Kawhi, and in Game 3 in particular, they put Kawhi on Donovan Mitchell. And it's weird when you do that because Kawhi, when he was first 2 years on the Spurs, you could put him on the best guy because by and large, they just needed him to be a defender. And while his offensive game developed, now he's a primary scoring option. So you don't necessarily want to put him on the other team's best player for all the time he's on the floor. So it's just weird how to balance that. I guess Kawhi is, but then he's an offensive player and he could get tire out. I don't know.
Yeah, I think like the way that Kawhi is used best is probably being a help defender, especially in this series. Like I feel like he's swiped Mitchell from the side a couple times. He can come with like the strong double on Gobert. And like his length he has like one of the most incredible wingspans, which is why he was just able to yak all over Derek Favors, which was, by the way, one of like, I think the most
best
important
dunks in NBA, and one of the best dunks in NBA history.
Dude, he went through his stomach.
Yes.
That's really hard.
Yes.
Not from personal experience. It looks really hard, you know? He had a bunch of those moments today where I just felt like the Clippers weren't going to let them lose a game. And like back to the point of like, you said the game was boring. It was just like,
it was inevitable. Maybe not boring, but it was inevitable.
You just kind of knew, you could look at the Clippers and kind of know that they weren't going to let the Jazz win this game, which was super impressive because I think that like, it would be a very Clippers thing to like let the Jazz shoot themselves back into the game, right?
The thing though was like for a second in the third quarter, you kind of thought it. Right.
You did, but that dunk was like one of the bigger moments that just like there were a couple moments where like Kawhi especially he had that block on Mitchell coming back. He had a couple moments where he just swung the momentum back. He hit some big threes.
Too.
Yeah. I feel like they knew what was going to happen, right? Like this is just what happens in the league now. Like you just go up big because everybody can shoot, and these are like the two highest volume 3-point shooting teams left in the playoffs. They're going to have some lopsided results. And like for the Jazz, you need to know like, hey, let's be able to get through this. And I think they actually did a pretty good job of that. But the Clippers also like kind of responded to that knowing like, hey, this lead is not actually as safe as we think it is. This is a really good team. They're going to keep fighting back. But like the Clippers just didn't, like they were so aggressive that whole game, just driving into the paint over and over again. Their defensive rotations were amazing. Like I feel like ever since getting Morris at the 5, playing smaller, like they just have like more synchronicity on both ends. And it makes them really, really scary. But yeah, just having experienced all of that and just like a really consistent Clippers game, then to have Kawhi get hurt at the end, like I don't know. It just kind of puts a damper on it. Like, it's just like this team is peaking, but there's this tension because, like, you just don't know whether
as long as Kawhi is playing, there's going to be that tension, right? Because we've known this since Toronto. He has knee issues. He has leg issues. That's just what it is. And it's the same
thing with Embiid, right? Like, the Sixers are finding this new level, but at the same time, it's like the guy who makes it all go is just like he has so much on his shoulders and an injury history. Well, like Kawhi and Embiid as two-way players are both just being asked to do so much in both series. Like Embiid has to defend Trae Young. He has to like prevent the lob. He has to be an offensive threat, get like, 10 post-ups a game minimum.
He has to be a superstar, but he has to be a superstar, but he doesn't have superstar type health that he needs, right? Like that's pretty much what it is. He has to do what he has to do, but the health-wise, both of them may not be able to do it on a consistent basis. And I think that also that's why, at least for this Clippers team, that's why series may go longer than they're supposed to, right? Because you're not going to be able to get 100% out of these two players on a consistent basis. Is that fair to say, you think?
Embiid and Kawhi, yeah.
Speaking of like having a lot on your shoulders, Donovan Mitchell, right? Like he has to score for this Jazz team.
But
no, he has to score for this Jazz team, and I just can't. Like they need, and I'm not sure if they need, Conley out of this series. I believe they do, but without Conley, a lot of pressure is on Donovan Mitchell to score. And me and Raja talk about this all the time. When one of your star players are out, especially one of your scoring stars and one of your facilitators are out, that makes a Royce Young have to play, out of his element. That makes a Joe Ingles have to play out of his role. And I'm starting to see that with Donovan Mitchell, right? When he has to play out of his element too, has to score a lot, but it always seems like he's scoring just to keep them into the game. Do you see more balanced scoring coming back when they go back to Utah?
Yeah, because, role players always play a little bit better at home. And that is exactly, I think that's exactly kind of what happened, right? Like you had that trickle down effect. And while Mitchell shot himself into the game and, he's going to figure out a way to get his offense, like that first half, they just needed way more from Bogey and Ingles. And they just didn't get enough at all. That changed in the second half. Just a lot more aggression. Honestly, two really similar games in that, like, the first half and the second half for Utah were just so utterly different in terms of just effort and execution that it's hard to even like put the two against each other. But yeah, like I think they just needed more from both of those guys, and I think that's like kind of where it impacts them the most. Like Mitchell's a superstar; he's going to be fine, but you know, like getting Joe Ingles like the secondary pick and roll on the side so that he can just like go to work and like either he hits a floater or he's hitting Gobert, like that type of stuff. It becomes harder to get into those actions when you don't have like the setup man in Conley and like Mitchell getting gravity elsewhere. And also it just makes Mitchell's life so much harder. The guy's like like he was limping like for most of the fourth quarter. Like clearly tweaked his ankle a little bit there and just like was somehow continuing to get to the rim and like actually like just seemed to have like a pretty endless reservoir. Like also shout out to all, like I know that it's not something that we need to valorize by any means, but like also like let's just honor how many of these dudes are like playing through like injuries right now. There are so many NBA players that are just like pushing through. It's crazy.